Hello, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm gonna be telling you about my favorite and least favorite books I read this year. So I'm gonna be starting with my 5 least favorite books. Then I'm actually gonna be talking about 3 books that were disappointing, but they weren't exactly my least favorites. I just expected to love them and I didn't. And then I'm gonna be telling you about my 5 favorite books because I like to leave the best for last. And so starting off with my least favorite books, the first one was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, and this was a mystery thriller. And in this book we followed mainly Jess, and she needed a fresh start, and so she asked her half-brother Ben to go spend some time at his Paris apartment. And he doesn't really want to let her go, but ends up agreeing. And when she gets there, Ben is nowhere to be seen. And so she starts realizing that there's something weird going on. And also his neighbors are all very suspicious, and she's sure that they know something about where Ben is or what happened to him. And she is determined to find out. And so we follow her trying to figure out what happened to Ben. And we have POVs from like every single character in this book. And I didn't care about any of them. And that includes Jess. And the fact that I didn't care about Jess means that I also didn't really care about the mystery, didn't really care about the story, didn't care about the investigation, didn't really care about anything. And the mystery itself also didn't really like progress until the very end. And when we got to the end and got the reveal, like I said, didn't care and didn't find it, exciting. And the whole book was not exciting, it wasn't thrilling. I was just bored basically the whole time. And so yeah, definitely did not like this one. The next book I really didn't like was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and this was a contemporary romance. And I just want to start by saying that I don't typically read romance, but I read this for a vlog where I was, trying different types of romance to see if I could like them. This was the one I liked the least for sure. The others were fine. And yeah, this one I really didn't like. And so we followed Lucy and Josh, and they worked at the same place. They worked together. And we only follow like Lucy's POV, and she keeps saying that they hate each other, but like they don't. And I didn't like either of the characters like by themselves, and I definitely didn't like them together because Lucy was just really annoying. Even if she kept saying that she was such a good, kind soul, she wasn't. And Josh, I literally have nothing to say about him because even though Lucy described him as being, super hot and interesting, I didn't find him interesting at all. And they were even worse together. And even the plots that existed apart from the romance, I also didn't care at all. And once again, I was just bored the whole time. Next book was 9 Lives by Peter Swanson, and this was another mystery thriller. And in this one we have 9 strangers who all received a letter with all 9 names written on it. And at first, none of them thought anything about it because they didn't know each other. It was just a bunch of random names with their own name on it, which personally I would find weird, but they didn't care about it until people on the list started dying. And on the list there was actually one FBI agent, and so she was determined to figure out what the hell was happening. And we have POVs from the 9 different characters, and I feel like that was a lot because we spent very little time with each of them, and I feel like we didn't get to connect to any of them before they died, so I didn't really care about any of their deaths. And also the reveal I was underwhelmed by as well. And this one I wasn't as bored with, but I definitely wasn't interested either. And once again, I didn't care about any of the characters, so I just, again, didn't really care about anything. My 4th least favorite book was Wake the Bones by Elizabeth Kilcoyne, and this was a fantasy paranormal horror. And in this one, we followed Laurel, who left college to move back home to help in her family's tobacco farm. And we also followed three of her friends who also worked at the farm. And weird things start happening around the farm, and they try to figure out what is happening, and they quickly realize that it's like the bad thing is actually a devil, and that's in the synopsis. And yeah, like they try to deal with it. And I mean, I thought that was gonna be, the main point of the story. That was what I was there for, but actually, like half of the book, maybe more, was just dealing with the characters' personal issues. And I was here to read a horror book, not a contemporary, because I don't usually read contemporaries because it's just not my thing. So I didn't really care. And like, even with so much time spent with the characters' personal problems, I still didn't really connect with any of them and like care about them. Like, if anything, like if they were in danger, I wasn't worried, basically. But honestly, like that wasn't the whole problem, because even the horror plots, I wasn't invested in, and I wasn't scared either. And once again, I didn't care about anything. And my last least favorite book was Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. And this was another fantasy horror, and it's just sad that two fantasy horrors were in my least favorite list, because I love fantasy and I love horror. But anyway, in this book we followed Ada, who is, I don't really know because it was never clearly explained like what type of creature she and her dad were, but they weren't human, and basically they could like realize what was wrong with humans. Like if they were sick, they could know what was wrong with them and they could cure them. And so every time someone was sick in their town, they would go to Ada and her dad to cure them. And so we see a lot of those cures, and also Ada starts hanging out with a human guy who her dad doesn't really like, and personally, I didn't either. And yeah, like there's that issue, and we also see, like I said, a lot of the cures, and I was fine with the first like two or three, but there were a lot of them, and there were a lot of chapters like of other people talking about them, and it was just a little repetitive, and I was a little bored. And like when we got to the end and there was sort of a plot twist, it didn't really feel like a plot twist because I guessed that literally from the beginning of the book. So yeah, definitely did not like that one either. So yes, those were my least favorite books. And let's move on to my disappointing books. So the first one was The Deep by Nick Cutter. And this was a science fiction horror. And like the reason why this was disappointing, like why I expected to love it, was because last year I read The Troop by the same author and I absolutely loved it. So I expected to love this one as well. But I clearly didn't. But basically, we are following Luke, and in his world, I mean, it's our world, but there is a disease called the Gets, and it causes people to forget things. And it starts with like little things like forgetting where you put your keys, and then like bigger things like forgetting how to drive, until it just leads your body to forget how to function and you die. And there is no cure for the Gets until Luke's brother and his team, who are exploring something like in the ocean, they discover a substance that seems to be a cure for a lot of things, and they call it ambrosia. And so they're wondering if it could also be a cure for the Gets. And so Luke goes down to his brother's station in the ocean, and things just get worse from there. And there were definitely things in this book that I really liked, like the whole atmosphere. It was very claustrophobic because they were in a station underwater, obviously very, closed off from the world, and a very tight space. And it was creepy, like the whole atmosphere of the book was very creepy, which I did really enjoy. But one thing that I did not enjoy was the body horror, and typically I love body horror when it's done on humans, but in this case, there was a lot of body horror on animals, and I just didn't love that. And even the blood itself, like, it was mostly interesting, but I just wanted more. Like, I wanted more from the disease before, like, I wanted to see the effects, and I just wanted more in general, even from the plot, like, afterwards. Like, the feeling that this book gave me was that I just wanted more, and so that is why I was disappointed with it. The next book I was disappointed by was Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff, and this was a fantasy book and the first one in the series with the same name. And I actually have a physical copy of this book, but I left it in my place in Italy because it didn't fit in my suitcase because that book is enormous. So, yes. And basically in this book, we follow Gabriel, who is a vampire hunter, but also half vampire, half human. Like, there's a whole group of people like him who are like half vampire, half humans, who hunts like full-on vampires. And the whole book is just Gabriel telling his life story to Jean-Francois, who is an actual vampire. And also, like, in the world, there was a thing called Day's Death, I think, that basically shadow covered the sun, and basically, like, it allows the vampires and monsters to roam free, and there might be a way to reverse that. And yeah, there's also like a big part of the plot of the book. And the reason why I expected to love this one was because there are vampires and I love vampires. And the reason why I didn't love this book was because there were barely any vampires. Because, yeah, like I said, we were mainly learning about Gabriel's life story and him becoming a hunter, but there wasn't really, like, we got some scenes of like him fighting vampires, but I was just expecting, I don't know, more vampire-ness, and I didn't really get it. And also, like, it wasn't just that. I also didn't like Gabriel, and I was tired of following him for so many 100 pages, really. And like, the main plot was interesting. I was invested, but I felt like there were a lot of unnecessary scenes as well. And so I was definitely disappointed by that book, especially because it was so long, and yeah, did not love it. And my last disappointing book was Belladonna by Adeline Grace, and this was also fantasy and also the first book in a series with the same name. And this one I expected to love. I mean, obviously because of the premise that sounded very interesting to me, but also I saw so many good reviews of this book that I was just like, this has to be incredible. But I didn't really love it. And so basically we follow Signa, and she can talk to death, and she can talk to ghosts, and she can't die. Like, she can get on the verge of death, which is when she can see death and talk to him and interact, do all of that, but she can't actually die. Like, her body will heal itself very quickly and she will be fine. And she is 19 years old, and she will get a huge inheritance when she turns 20. And so there are a lot of people in her family interested in that. So she has been living with a lot of relatives in her life, but they all end up dying. And we see her moving to a new family. And in that house that she's now living in, there is sort of a murder mystery going on. And so there were three main things happening in this book. And there was the murder mystery, which honestly, like, most of the book was about that. And that wasn't what I was there for. There wasn't what I was interested in. I really didn't care about it. And then there was Signa and her powers, which was what I was there for, but I didn't get enough of it. And there was the romance, which was problematic to start with. And even if we ignore that, I still didn't care about it. And there was also like a fourth thing, I guess. There was the question of someone's identity, but I thought it was pretty obvious who that character was, so not really a mystery for me. And so, once again, the premise was super interesting. I was expecting to love it, but I was just, again, bored most of the time. But moving on to better things, let's talk about my favorite books of this year. And so we are gonna start with The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, which is the third and last book in the Poppy War series. And I read this in January, like it was so long that it doesn't even feel like I read it this year. But honestly, like I could have chosen any of the books in the series because it was actually hard to choose just 5 books for my favorites because I read some really good books this year. But I ended up choosing this one out of the 3 because this one made me cry, and I think this was the only book this year that made me cry. So it definitely had to be this one. And also, like when I was taking the books out of my bookshelf for this video, I just noticed like how I used to tab this, and I put the tabs like so far out of the book, and like why did I do that? It looks horrendous. But anyway, this is a fantasy series and also historical fiction, and we follow Rin, who is a war orphan, and she passes a test to a elite military academy when she's, I want to say 18. And so she is expecting her life to basically change, become so much better. And her life does change when she goes to the academy, but not exactly for the best. Because added to all the problems that she has at the school, there is also a war starting. And this whole series was incredible. Like it was brutal, but it was incredible. And like the world building, phenomenal. The characters, most of them like I didn't like, but because they were supposed to be terrible people, and there wasn't a single character in this whole series that I didn't have like a strong reaction to. So they were all just so well done, and the magic system in this series was also so good. And I mean the whole plot, like it was incredible. And I mean I said I didn't like most of the characters, but like Rin, she was iconic. And I mean, like I said, it made me cry. It absolutely destroyed me. And what more can I ask from a book, you know? So, I mean, I gave 5 stars to all of the books in the series, but like all of the stars, really. This was so, so good. So, my next favorite book was Children of Ruin, which is the second book in the Children of Time series. And this is a science fiction series, and it's set in the future, typical for science fiction. And we follow the last members of the human race as they are leaving a dying Earth to look for a new home. And after some time, they do find a planet that has actually been prepared for human life. But as they get closer, they realize that there is another species living there. And so this whole time, after the planet was prepared and until the humans got there, it has basically turned into the worst nightmare for humanity. And now these 2 species need to fight and figure out who actually deserves to live on this planet. And I mean, this was actually more of the plot of the first book in the series, but I am obviously not gonna spoil what happened to lead to the second one. But I loved both, but I loved this one even more. And in both books, I really loved the world building, and I really like to see the other species, like the non-humans, to see like how their community worked, how they did things so differently from humans. That was so interesting to see. And also like the technology and science in this book, like, you know, it was explained in a way that it could make sense. And I also really loved that. And I think the thing that made me love this one even more than the first was the fact that I liked the characters more in this one. Like, I loved everyone, which never happens to me really. But yeah, I loved everything. And yeah, like the most fascinating part about these books is definitely to see the other species, like how they function, how their communities work. That is so interesting to see. Like, I definitely recommend this to anyone who likes science fiction because it is so interesting. Next favorite book was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and this is fantasy and was a standalone when I read it, but now is gonna be part of a series. And actually, like, I feel like there are very mixed reviews on this book. People either love it or really don't like it, but I'm on the side of people who loved it. And this book is very, like, the plot is very complex and it's hard to explain. Like, I remember when I did my wrap up after reading this, I remember that I struggled to talk about this book, and I know that I'm gonna struggle now. But basically, in this world, the forces of darkness have been banished for 1,000 years, but they are threatening to come back. And there is a queen whose bloodline is connected to the banishment of those dark forces. And so she is basically the one responsible to, like, she and her family are the ones responsible to keep the darkness away. And so she is being prepared to marry and have an heir because she needs to keep the bloodline going. And also there is a mage who is sent to protect the queen by a secret society. And also the East and the West have been divided for a very long time and they are refusing to work together. And we follow 4 POVs in this book, and I ended up loving those 4 characters. Some of them, like, I loved the whole time, like the main character. Some of them I didn't like at first, but I ended up loving. And something that is very unlike me, I actually loved the main romance in this book. Like, I was actually obsessed. And I also loved the pacing, I loved the writing style, I loved all of the fight scenes, especially like the big battle, like at the end. That was so good. And the world building was also incredible in my opinion, because we had like 4 main kingdoms and they all felt very distinct. And I also loved how everything just came together in the end. And yeah, I basically just love everything about this book. I thought it was epic, and yeah, definitely one of my favorites. Then we got Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, and this was a paranormal horror. And in this book, we are following Felix and Faye, who are celebrating their engagement in a cabin on the mountains. And yes, the main character has the name of the author, which I did find had like another layer of creepiness. And yeah, they are in the mountains and they start hearing and seeing movement and people around their cabin, and it just gets really weird and creepy. And also, actually, before that, there is a prologue that is super creepy because it has like animals sensing things, and I personally just think that is very scary every single time that happens. So like, I started loving it right at the prologue. And all the descriptions in this book were so vivid and horrifying and creepy, and it got to a point where like the characters and us couldn't really trust anything. Like, even the characters themselves weren't trusting their own minds, and it was just very scary, which was exactly what I wanted. And yeah, absolutely love this book. And my last favorite book of this year was Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, which is the 13th book in the Wheel of Time series. And honestly, like, I could have chosen any of the last 3 books of the series because I gave 5 stars to all of them. But like, this one was just on another level, you know? And it almost made me cry, honestly. And I don't even know how to introduce this series, because especially like to talk about the 13th book. But basically, like, the whole premise of the series, I guess, is that there is a chosen one who is the Dragon Reborn, and he is supposed to lead the fight against the darkness, the dark side, the bad people. And there are so many characters in this series. There are so many POVs. Honestly, like, I got to the end of this series not really knowing who everyone was. Like, there were some characters who like sometimes appear and I was like, who are you really? And then like, in context with like where they were and who they were with, I could figure it out. But if it was just them talking, I would be super confused. And yeah, it's just a lot going on. And there was definitely a lot going on in this particular book, and I love every second of it. And also, something that I had been waiting for many books happened in this one, and also my two favorite characters were absolutely iconic, and like the main things happened with them in this book. So, you know, perfection. And like all the interactions, or almost all the interactions between the characters were so like adorable and precious, and I was just so proud of everyone, and that is why I got emotional and almost cried. And yeah, I just loved it so much. And just like the Poppy Wars series book, like all the stars to this book, I absolutely loved it so much. Like just thinking about it makes me happy. And also like let's just compare my tabs, because like I read this month in December, and like in January. How ridiculous is that? Like, why did I do this? Why did I think that this looked good? You know? You know? Anyway, so yes, those were my least favorite, my disappointing, and my favorite books I read in 2022. And that is everything for this week's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, give it a like and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!